November 18th, 1944. Cold morning light over Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia. The air smelled of pine needles and damp earth, the kind of smell that would have been peaceful in any other life. But Margarete Hoffman wasn't living any other life. She was standing outside a long, narrow building with peeling white paint, her hands clasped in front of her body, her legs crossed beneath her gray prisoner uniform. She had been standing there for 3 hours. The alternative was worse. They told her to strip her dignity before they took her uniform. Not with words, not with violence, with architecture. Inside that building were 6 toilets. Just toilets. No stalls, no partitions, no doors, no curtains. Just 6 white porcelain bowls mounted against a concrete wall, fully visible to anyone who walked past, fully exposed to each other, arranged in a row like soldiers at attention. When she first saw them the day before, she thought it was temporary, a mistake, something they'd fix. But the American guard had simply pointed and said in slow English, "Latrine, use when needed." Then he walked away. No explanation, no apology, just the facts. Margarete was 31 years old. She had survived the bombing of Cologne. She had worked in field hospitals where men screamed and died in her arms. She had dressed wounds that exposed bone and extracted shrapnel from flesh without flinching. She had been captured by enemy soldiers, transported across an ocean, and locked behind barbed wire in a foreign country. But this simple act of using a toilet while exposed to the world, this was breaking her in ways the war never had. Her mother once told her, "A woman's dignity lives in small, private moments." Now every private moment was public. Every basic human need became a performance of humiliation. She could feel the shame burning in her chest, hot and heavy, like swallowing fire. Behind her, the other women were waking up in the barracks. 23 German women, all captured in France or Italy. Nurses, signal operators, clerks, secretaries, women who had worn Wehrmacht uniforms and now wore gray prisoner clothes marked with the letters PW. They came from Munich and Hamburg and Berlin and Stuttgart. They spoke different dialects and had different stories, but this morning they would all face the same impossible choice. The first one to discover the latrines had been young Elsa, only 19 years old, barely more than a girl. She had walked in yesterday morning, stopped in the doorway, turned pale, and walked back out without saying a word. Within an hour, everyone knew. By evening, the whispers had turned to quiet desperation. Some women cried, others went silent. Frau Schneider, a 47-year-old former factory supervisor from Stuttgart, had closed her eyes and whispered a prayer in a voice so broken it made the others look away. That first night, Margarete heard footsteps in the dark, women waiting until 2 a.m., 3 a.m., hoping the guards would be fewer, hoping the darkness would hide what daylight exposed. She heard whispered conversations, strategies being formed. "We stand in the doorway, block the view. We sing loudly, cover the sounds. We take turns, make a wall with our bodies." These were battlefield tactics for using a bathroom. By the second morning, Margaret's body was screaming. She had held her bladder for 18 hours, drinking almost nothing, trying to will away the basic functions of being human. When she finally couldn't wait anymore, she walked to that building and stood outside, gathering courage that shouldn't be necessary for this. Through the doorway, she could see 2 other women inside, sitting on toilets with their heads bowed, staring at the floor, trying to disappear into themselves while remaining completely visible. A guard walked past. He didn't look, but his boots echoed on the concrete, a reminder that privacy was a gift they no longer possessed. The morning bell rang across the camp. 6 o'clock. The Georgia sun was climbing higher, burning off the mist. Other women were lining up for breakfast, oatmeal and bread, food that was adequate, food that was more than many Germans were getting back home. The Americans fed them, gave them medical care, followed the rules written in the Geneva Convention. But no one had written rules about bathroom privacy because the men who wrote those rules never imagined women in uniform, captured on battlefields, held in camps designed for male soldiers. Margarete finally entered the building. The concrete floor was cold beneath her feet. The smell of disinfectant burned her nose. She walked to the furthest toilet, the one in the corner, as if distance might create the illusion of privacy. She sat down, trying not to cry, trying not to think about her mother's house in Munich, about the small bathroom with the lock on the door, about the luxury of being alone with her own body. She heard the door open, footsteps, another woman entering, stopping, hesitating, then silence, the kind of silence that holds shame. When she stood up, her legs were shaking, not from weakness, from the violence of being exposed. She walked back to the barracks with her head down, and when young Elsa looked at her with questions in her eyes, Margarete could only shake her head. No words existed for this. That afternoon, Lieutenant Mary Patterson, the head nurse, noticed something in her medical logs. 3 women had reported bladder pain. 2 were showing early signs of dehydration. 1 had a fever. Patterson was a veteran military nurse, tough as Tennessee iron, but she wasn't blind. She walked to the latrine building, stood in the doorway, and saw what the women saw. 6 toilets. No privacy. Her jaw tightened. She wrote in her notebook, "Facility inadequate for female prisoners. Health concerns expected." By the third day, the coping mechanisms were failing. Frau Schneider had developed a bladder infection from holding too long. Elsa had fainted during morning roll call, her body giving out from dehydration. The women were drinking less water to avoid using the facilities. They were waiting until night, until their bodies couldn't wait anymore, until the shame was marginally less than the pain. They were learning to live in a constant state of humiliation, the way prisoners learn to live with hunger, or cold, or fear. But Margarete was also learning something else. She was learning the shape of American power. The guards didn't beat them, didn't starve them, didn't torture them, but they also didn't see them. Not really. They saw prisoners, problems to be managed, bodies to be counted and fed and confined. They didn't see women who needed privacy, who needed dignity, who needed the small mercies that separate humans from animals. On the fourth night, Margarete sat on her bunk with her notebook. She had kept this notebook through capture, through the ship journey across the Atlantic, through processing and transport and arrival at this camp. In it, she had written fragments, observations, thoughts she couldn't speak aloud. Now she wrote, "They feed us, but do not see us. They follow rules, but do not understand us. We are enemy prisoners, yes, but we are also women, and they have forgotten what that means." Elsa found her writing and sat down beside her. The girl's face was pale, her eyes hollow from crying and lack of sleep. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. "I survived the bombs. I survived capture. But this, Margarete, this is breaking me. Not from cruelty, from blindness. They don't even know what they're doing to us." Margarete closed her notebook, looked at the 22 other women in the barracks. Some were lying down, too exhausted to move. Others sat in small groups, whispering in German, their voices carrying the weight of collective shame. And in that moment, Margarete made a decision, not a dramatic one, not a heroic one, just a simple, necessary one. "Then we tell them," she said quietly. Elsa blinked. "Tell them what?" "That we need privacy, that we need doors, that we need to be treated like women, not just like prisoners." "They won't listen." "Maybe not, but we have to ask, because if we don't, they'll never know. And we'll spend however long this war lasts, living in shame that we accepted without speaking." That night, Margarete called an unofficial meeting. All 23 women gathered in the barracks after lights out, sitting on bunks in the darkness, speaking in whispers. Some were afraid. "They'll punish us," one said. "They'll think we're ungrateful." Another worried. But Frau Schneider, the oldest among them, spoke with the authority of her years. "We're not asking for luxuries. We're asking for basic human dignity. If they refuse, then we know who they really are. If they agree, then maybe there's hope for what comes after this war." They voted. 23 hands rose in the darkness. 23 women agreeing to do something that required more courage than most people understand. They would ask their captors for mercy. They would ask for privacy. They would ask to be seen as human. Margarete volunteered to speak. She had some English, more than most, and she had something else, a kind of quiet strength that came from having survived too much to be afraid of asking for too little. She spent the next day practicing 3 words, over and over until they felt natural in her mouth. "We need privacy." 3 words. In war, sometimes the smallest requests require the greatest courage. The walk to Colonel Fletcher's office felt longer than the march to capture. Margaret's boots clicked on the wooden steps of the administration building. Beside her, the translator Clara Ara walked quietly, a young American woman who spoke fluent German and had kind eyes. Clara Ara had helped Margarete write the request formally, had coached her on military protocol, had explained that asking was a right under the Geneva Convention. But rights on paper and reality in practice were different things. Colonel James Fletcher sat behind a plain wooden desk, an American flag in the corner, maps on the walls, a coffee cup leaving rings on military reports. He was in his 50s, gray at the temples, with the kind of face that had seen one war already and was tired of this one. When Margarete entered, he stood, a gesture of basic courtesy that surprised her. Enemy or not, she was still a woman in his office. "You have a request?" he asked. His voice was neutral, not unkind, but careful. Margarete stood at attention the way she'd seen soldiers do. Her hands trembled slightly. She gripped the paper Clara Ara had helped her write. The words were in English. "Request for privacy modifications in sanitation facilities." She took a breath. "Colonel, the latrines in the women's section have no doors, no walls between the toilets, no curtains. We, the women prisoners, we need privacy." Clara Ara translated smoothly, though Margaret's English had been clear enough. The room went quiet. Fletcher blinked, his expression shifting from official attention to personal discomfort. This was not a topic he had expected to discuss. Behind him, Lieutenant Patterson, who had been standing by the door reviewing medical files, stepped forward. "Sir, if I may," Patterson said, "I've documented health issues related to this. Bladder infections, dehydration, stress-related symptoms. The women are avoiding the facilities because they have no privacy. It's becoming a medical concern. Fletcher looked at the medical officer, then back at Margarete. He could see the shame in her face, the courage it took to stand here and ask for something so basic it shouldn't need asking. He cleared his throat. The facilities were built according to standard POW camp specifications. For men, sir, Patterson interjected quietly. The specifications didn't account for women prisoners. Fletcher ran his hand over his face. He was a military man. He followed orders, protocols, regulations, but there were no regulations for this. The Geneva Convention required humane treatment, medical care, adequate food. It said nothing about bathroom privacy because the men who wrote it in 1929 never imagined this scenario. I'll take it under advisement, he said finally. That's all for now. Margarete saluted, the gesture automatic from her own military training. Then she left, walking back across the camp with Clara, wondering if under advisement meant yes or if it meant the polite military phrase for no. What she didn't see was Fletcher sitting alone in his office after she left, staring at the request form, feeling the weight of a decision that seemed small but wasn't. He picked up the phone and called his supply officer. Davis, how difficult would it be to install doors in the women's latrine building? The pause on the other end was long. Sir, are you serious? Dead serious. Answer the question. Well, sir, we'd need lumber, hinges, labor, approval from regional command. It's not in the budget. I didn't ask about the budget. I asked how difficult. Another pause. 3, maybe 4 days of work. If we had approval? Fletcher hung up. Then he called regional command. The conversation was brief and frustrating. You want to build what? The regional commander asked. Privacy doors for the women's latrines. Is this required by Geneva Convention? No, sir, but it's a medical necessity. Submit a formal request with documentation. We'll review it. Fletcher knew what "we'll review it" meant in military bureaucracy. It meant forms, committees, delays, and probably denial. But Lieutenant Patterson wasn't waiting for bureaucracy. She spent the next 2 days documenting everything. Every bladder infection, every case of dehydration, every woman who came to sick call with stress-related symptoms. She photographed the latrine facility carefully, without any prisoners present. She wrote a detailed medical report comparing it to the men's facilities, which had basic partition walls. She built a case that was undeniable. Meanwhile, in the women's barracks, the waiting began. Margarete told the others about the meeting, about Fletcher's uncomfortable face, about his promise to consider it. Some women felt hope, others felt despair. Consider it means no, one woman said bitterly. It means they'll think about it and decide we don't matter enough. Days passed, then a week. The women continued their coping strategies, their nighttime visits, their human curtains of dignity. Frau Schneider's bladder infection worsened despite antibiotics. Young Elsa stopped eating, her body shutting down from the constant stress, and Margarete began to doubt. Had she made things worse by asking? Would they be labeled difficult prisoners? Would the Americans think they were ungrateful for the food, the medical care, the relative safety of captivity? But then something unexpected happened. Captain Robert Chen, the camp's chief engineer, began sketching. He was a quiet man, Chinese-American, who had faced his own battles with discrimination in the military. He understood what it meant to be treated as less than human because of who you were. Late at night, in his quarters, he drew plans, simple plans, wooden stall doors with hinges and latches, canvas curtains as an alternative, minimal materials, maximum dignity. He didn't wait for approval, he just prepared. Because Chen understood something that bureaucracy often forgot. Sometimes doing the right thing means being ready when permission finally comes. On the 9th day, young Greta collapsed during morning roll call. She was 17, the youngest prisoner in the camp, and she had been holding her bladder for nearly 24 hours. The infection had spread to her kidneys. She fell face first onto the gravel, unconscious before she hit the ground. Lieutenant Patterson was there in seconds. She checked pulse, pupils, temperature. Then she looked up at the guard and said one word, "Stretcher." They carried Greta to the infirmary. Patterson started IV fluids, administered antibiotics, monitored vital signs. And then she walked, without knocking, straight into Colonel Fletcher's office. "Sir," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger, "I just had a 17-year-old girl collapse from a kidney infection caused by avoiding bathroom use. This is the 5th infection this month. All preventable, all caused by the same problem. I need to know, are we building those doors or not?" Fletcher looked at her, saw the fury in her eyes, the medical charts in her hands, the evidence of harm caused by neglect. He made a decision, not based on regulations or budgets or regional approval, based on the simple recognition that Lieutenant Patterson was right. "Get Captain Chen," he said. "Tell him to start today." An hour later, Chen stood in Fletcher's office with his already prepared plans rolled under his arm. Fletcher looked at them, surprised. "You already drew these up?" "Yes, sir. I wanted to be ready. How long will it take? 3 days, sir. Maybe less. Fletcher nodded slowly. Then he asked the question that mattered. Will this work? Will it give them real privacy? Chen looked at the plans, at the careful measurements, the simple but effective design. Yes, sir, it won't be fancy, but it will be dignified. That evening, at roll call, Fletcher stood before the assembled women prisoners. Through Clara Ara, he made an announcement that would change everything. Your request has been approved. Starting tomorrow, Captain Chen and his engineering team will install privacy doors and curtains in the latrine facilities. Construction will take approximately 3 days. During that time, temporary facilities will be available. That is all. The silence that followed was profound. The women stood frozen, unable to believe what they'd just heard. Margarete felt tears burning in her eyes, but didn't let them fall. Beside her, Elsa's hand found hers and squeezed. Frau Schneider closed her eyes and whispered, Gott sei Dank. God be thanked. They had asked for privacy, and the Americans had said yes. Such a small thing, such an enormous thing, because in that moment, they understood something they hadn't quite believed before. Even in captivity, even as enemies, they were still seen as human beings who deserved basic dignity. That night, in the barracks, the women talked quietly. Not about the war, not about home, not about what would come next. They talked about doors, about privacy, about the strange mercy of being heard by the people who had every reason not to listen. And Margarete wrote in her notebook, Today they gave us something worth more than food or medicine. They gave us back the right to be private, to be modest, to be women. They didn't have to, but they did. And I will remember this for the rest of my life. The truck arrived at dawn. Margarete heard it before she saw it, the diesel engine coughing to life in the cold November air, gears grinding as it rolled through the camp gates. She was already awake, had been awake since 4 a.m, unable to sleep from anticipation mixed with disbelief. Through the barracks window, she watched the truck park outside the latrine building. 3 American soldiers climbed out, their breath visible in the freezing air. One of them was Captain Chen. He moved differently than the other soldiers, quieter, more deliberate. He walked the perimeter of the building first, not rushing, measuring with his eyes before his hands ever touched wood or metal. His assistant, a young private named David Wong, followed with a clipboard and pencil, writing down measurements Chen called out in low tones. Then came Corporal James Miller, a tall man from Georgia with carpenter's hands, scarred and capable. He unloaded lumber from the truck bed, the planks making a solid thunk as they hit the ground. The smell of fresh-cut pine drifted across the camp, sharp and clean, mixing with the morning scent of coffee from the mess hall. 23 women stood outside the barracks, watching. They had been told to stay back, to let the men work, but they couldn't look away. This was too important, too unbelievable. Elsa stood beside Margarete, her thin arms wrapped around herself against the cold. They're really doing it, she whispered. I thought maybe they'd change their minds. Margarete said nothing. She just watched Chen kneel beside the first section of wall, running his hand along the concrete, checking for level. He pulled a carpenter's pencil from his pocket and made small marks where hinges would go. Every movement was precise, careful, the kind of attention you give to things that matter. Miller noticed her watching and nodded once, a simple acknowledgement. She nodded back. By 8 o'clock, the work had begun in earnest. The sound of saws biting through wood filled the air, rhythmic and purposeful. Chen had set up a work table outside, and Miller was cutting door frames to exact specifications. Each piece was measured twice, cut once, the old carpenter's rule. Wong treated the cut edges with wood preservative, the chemical smell stinging but necessary, and through it all, Chen supervised with quiet intensity, checking every angle with his level, every joint with his square. Around 10 o'clock, Margaret's work assignment brought her near the construction site. She was supposed to be sweeping the walkway between buildings, a daily task meant to keep prisoners occupied. But as she worked, she moved closer, drawn by curiosity and something deeper. She watched Miller's hands as he planed the edge of a door, the wood curling into delicate shavings that fell like snow. She watched Chen install the first hinge, his fingers working the screwdriver with practiced ease. She watched Wong paint wood preservative onto the frame, his strokes even and methodical. Chen noticed her standing there. He looked up, made brief eye contact, then gestured toward the plans spread on the work table. Through Wong, who spoke a little German, he asked, "Would you like to see?" Margarete hesitated, then stepped forward. The plans were technical, covered in measurements and angles she didn't fully understand, but the basic design was clear. 6 individual stalls, wooden doors with simple latches that couldn't lock from inside, a security requirement she understood, a small gap at the bottom, 4 inches, for safety checks, a gap at the top, 6 inches, for airflow. But between those gaps, privacy, real privacy. "It's perfect," she said in German. Wong translated. Chen nodded once, a small acknowledgement, then went back to work. By lunch, the frame for the first stall was complete. Miller stepped back, wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cold, and examined his work with critical eyes. "Plumb and square," he announced to Chen. "She'll hold." They sat on stacks of lumber to eat, opening metal lunchboxes. Miller's wife had packed extra, the way wives do, and he had sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, an apple, and a thick slice of cake. He ate slowly, methodically, while Chen reviewed the afternoon's work plan. Wong smoked a cigarette and sketched something in his notebook, probably design ideas for the next phase. Frau Schneider approached, carrying a broom, her work assignment similar to Margarette's. She was bolder than most, less afraid of the Americans. She gestured toward the wood scraps, asking through body language if she could dispose of them. Miller nodded. She worked efficiently, gathering scraps into neat piles, organizing them by size the way a factory supervisor would. Miller watched her with grudging respect. "She works like my mama," he said to Chen. "Same careful way." "War doesn't change character," Chen replied quietly. "Just circumstances." Then something unexpected happened. Miller looked at his extra sandwich, then at Margarete, who was sweeping nearby, then back at his lunch. He made a decision, stood up, walked over, and offered her the sandwich. "You hungry?" he asked in slow English. Margarete froze. Her first instinct was to refuse, the way prisoners learn to refuse anything that might create obligation or debt. But the sandwich smelled like home, like the bread her mother used to make, and she was hungrier than she wanted to admit. She took it with trembling hands. "Thank you," she said in careful English. Then, surprising herself, she sat down on a nearby crate and ate it slowly, savoring every bite. Miller returned to his lumber pile and didn't mention it again. But something had shifted. Some small barrier had fallen. That afternoon, the work continued. By 3 o'clock, 3 door frames were installed. By 4, the first door was hung. Chen tested it personally, opening and closing it a dozen times, checking that the hinges moved smoothly, that the latch caught properly, that nothing stuck or scraped. Only when he was satisfied did he move to the second stall. Around 4:30, as the winter sun began its early descent, Margarete approached Chen again. This time she had 3 other women with her. Through Wong's translation she said, "Captain, some of us worked in factories before the war. We know carpentry, canvas work, measuring. May we help?" The question hung in the cold air. Chen looked at Fletcher, who had been observing from a distance all day. Fletcher walked over, his boots crunching on wood shavings. "Can they do the work safely?" he asked Chen. "Yes, sir." "Will it speed completion?" "Possibly, sir." Fletcher considered. Rules didn't explicitly forbid prisoners from helping with their own accommodations, but it was unusual, potentially complicated. On the other hand, these women had asked for this modification, had waited patiently, had shown nothing but gratitude, and something about letting them participate in building their own dignity felt right. "Then let them help," he said finally. "We're building this for them anyway." What happened next would become, in its quiet way, more significant than the doors themselves. Frau Schneider, who had worked in a Stuttgart furniture factory for 15 years, showed Miller a better technique for mounting hinges. He was skeptical at first, tried it her way, and watched the hinge sit perfectly flush. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. She didn't understand the words, but recognized the tone of surprised respect. They shared a small smile. Enemy prisoner and American soldier, united briefly by the craft of good carpentry. Young Elsa worked with Wong, holding canvas while he measured for the curtain alternatives. They had no common language beyond gestures and numbers, but work created its own communication. Point, nod, measure, cut. She held the fabric taut while he marked cutting lines. He showed her how to hem edges properly. Within an hour, they had developed an efficient rhythm, and once, when their hands brushed accidentally reaching for the same tool, they both pulled back quickly, embarrassed, then laughed at the shared awkwardness. Margarete worked directly with Chen on the most technical aspects. Where should curtain rods mount? Should they hang inside or outside the door frames? Chen asked her preference, actually asked her, treating her opinion as valuable. She thought carefully. "Both," she said through Wong. "Choice is dignity too." Chen nodded, understanding immediately, and adjusted his plans. By sunset, the work crew had become something strange and unprecedented. You couldn't easily tell prisoner from soldier, German from American, enemy from ally. You could only see people building something together, focused on a shared task. The guards watched nervously. Some prisoners watched hopefully. And in Washington, if anyone had known about this collaboration, they probably would have stopped it. But here, in this moment, the rules bent just enough to let humanity through. Lieutenant Patterson came by near the end of the day with coffee in a thermos and tin cups. She poured for everyone, soldiers and prisoners alike. No one had asked her to do this. She just did it. When she handed a cup to Margarete, their eyes met. Patterson said softly, "Thank you for speaking up, for asking." Margarete didn't understand all the English, but she understood the tone. She nodded, holding the warm cup in her cold hands, feeling the steam rise against her face. That evening, Fletcher and Chen inspected the day's progress. 3 stalls were fully framed. 2 had doors hung. Canvas curtains were cut and hemmed, ready for installation. "They work well," Fletcher observed. "The prisoners." "Yes, sir." "You know what's strange?" Fletcher continued, his voice thoughtful. "We're in the middle of a war with these people. My son's fighting in France right now, maybe against their brothers, their husbands. But here we are, building them bathrooms, treating them with care. Does that make sense to you?" Chen was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "Sir, can I speak freely?" "Go ahead." "My family was sent to Manzanar in '42, internment camp for Japanese Americans. We're Chinese, but they didn't care about the difference. American citizens, born here, but we looked like the enemy, so... camp." He paused, staring at the half-built stalls. "The guards there? Some were decent people. Some weren't. But none of them built anything for us. They just held us, watched us, waited for the war to end. There was no dignity in it, just detention." Fletcher listened, saying nothing. "This," Chen gestured at the construction, "this is different. We're not just holding them. We're remembering they're human. And maybe that's the difference between winning a war and winning a peace." Fletcher nodded slowly. "My son," he said quietly, "if he's captured, if he ends up in some German camp, I'd want someone to remember he's still a man, still deserves basic dignity, even in defeat." He looked at Chen. "Maybe that's what we're really building here. Not doors. The world we want to live in when this is over." They stood in silence as the sun set over Fort Oglethorpe, two men on the same side of a war, building something that transcended it. The second day brought faster progress. Miller and Frau Schneider had developed an efficient partnership. Chen and Margarete communicated through gestures as much as translation. Wong and Elsa worked on canvas curtains with the focused concentration of craftspeople who took pride in their work. By noon, all 6 stall frames were complete. By 3 o'clock, 5 doors were hung. By sunset, the hardware was installed, latches tested, curtain rods mounted. The third morning was for finishing touches. Miller sanded rough edges that might catch skin or clothing. Wong applied a final coat of preservative. Chen installed small hooks inside each stall, an addition no one had requested but everyone appreciated. "My wife always complains about nowhere to put her purse in public bathrooms," he explained through Wong. Margarete watched him install those hooks and felt something crack open in her chest. They were building this not just to meet requirements, but with thought for comfort, for the small considerations that said, "We see you as people who deserve care." By 3 o'clock on the third day, it was finished. Chen did a final inspection, checking every door, every hinge, every latch. He opened and closed each door a dozen times, tested the latches from both sides, made sure the gaps at top and bottom met safety requirements while preserving privacy, verified that the canvas curtains hung properly and could be drawn or opened easily. Only when he was completely satisfied did he report to Fletcher, "Complete and operational, sir." Fletcher conducted his own inspection, formal and thorough. Then he called for Margarete and the other women. All 23 gathered outside the latrine building. Fletcher stood at attention and made a brief announcement through Clara Ara. "The facility is complete and operational. Each stall provides privacy while maintaining safety requirements per Geneva Convention. Captain Chen, good work." "Thank you, sir," Chen replied. "But the prisoners deserve recognition too. They helped build this." Fletcher paused, then nodded. "Noted." Margarete stepped forward. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward the building. Fletcher nodded. She walked to the first stall. Her hand touched the wooden door, smooth and solid under her palm. She pushed it open. The hinges moved silently, perfectly balanced. She stepped inside a space 3 feet by 4 feet, with walls that enclosed her, a door that closed behind her, a latch that clicked softly into place. She stood there, not using the toilet, just standing in private space, alone, unseen, dignified. On the other side of that simple wooden door, the world continued. But in here, she was private. She was modest. She was human. When she emerged, tears were streaming down her face. She didn't try to hide them. "Thank you," she said in English, the only English words she'd practiced specifically for this moment. Then she repeated it in German for the others to hear. "Danke." Chen nodded once. Miller looked away, uncomfortable with emotion, but clearly moved. Wong smiled slightly, and Fletcher, career military officer who had seen men die and cities burn, found himself unexpectedly affected by the sight of an enemy prisoner crying over a bathroom door. That night, the women used their new facilities. Each one entered privately, closed the door, experienced the profound relief of being alone with basic human functions. Some cried quietly inside their stalls. Others simply sat in grateful silence. Frau Schneider whispered prayers of thanks. Young Elsa, who had collapsed from the shame just weeks before, used the bathroom with dignity restored, and slept peacefully for the first time since capture. In the American quarters, Miller wrote a letter to his wife. Built something today that mattered. Just bathroom doors, but you should have seen their faces. Made me remember why we're fighting, not just to win, but to stay decent while we do it. Wong wrote in his personal journal, "Dignity isn't expensive. Just takes attention and care. Learn today that small things done right matter more than big things done poorly." Chen sat in his quarters, looking at the plans that were now realized in wood and hardware. He thought about his mother in Manzanar, about the indignities she'd endured, about how different things might have been if someone had simply asked, "What do you need?" He folded the plans carefully and filed them away, knowing that this small project had taught him something profound about the difference between detention and decency. And in his office, Fletcher wrote his report to Regional Command. He struggled with the words, trying to explain why bathroom doors mattered, why spending materials and labor on prisoner comfort was worth documenting. Finally, he wrote simply, "Privacy modifications completed at Women's POW facility. Cost, $47 in materials, 3 days labor. Result, immediate improvement in prisoner health, morale, and cooperation. Medical documentation attached. Recommend implementation across all women's POW facilities. Respectfully submitted, Colonel James Fletcher." He signed it, sealed it, and sent it up the chain of command, not knowing that this simple report would eventually change policy across every American POW camp holding women. Outside, under the Georgia stars, Margarete sat on her bunk with her notebook. She wrote, "Today, they finished building doors. But what they really built was proof that even in war, even between enemies, dignity is possible. They gave us privacy when they could have given us nothing. They listened when they could have ignored us. They built carefully when they could have built carelessly. And in doing so, they taught me something I will carry forever. The measure of a civilization is not how it treats its friends, but how it treats its enemies when no one is watching. America is watching itself. And today, it passed." The first morning after the doors were installed, something changed in the camp. Not dramatically, not obviously, but Lieutenant Patterson noticed it in her medical log. 3 women who had been coming to sick call daily no longer appeared. Frau Schneider's bladder infection was finally healing. Elsa was eating again, her appetite restored along with her dignity. The general anxiety that had pervaded the women's section, that constant low-level tension, had eased. Patterson documented everything methodically. December 1st, 1944, privacy doors installed, immediate observable effects, reduction in stress symptoms, improved hydration, decreased infection rates. Patients report significant improvement in psychological well-being. But the changes went deeper than medical charts could capture. The women walked differently now. Before, they had moved through camp with heads down, shoulders hunched, trying to minimize their presence. Now they walked with normal posture, the posture of people who were still prisoners, but who retained basic human dignity. They made eye contact with guards instead of avoiding it. They spoke more during work assignments, and most significantly, they cooperated more readily with camp rules and routines. One morning, guards found small items left on their desks. A mended uniform button, sewn on with perfect stitches. A pressed handkerchief, ironed carefully, a folded note in broken English. "Thank you for doors, no names, no requests for special treatment, just gratitude, expressed in the only ways available to prisoners with no possessions and no power." Miller held the handkerchief someone had left for him, felt the careful stitches along the hem, the precision of someone who took pride in work. He showed it to Chen. "I've been in this war 3 years, he said, his Georgia accent thick with emotion. "Fought in North Africa, Sicily, up through France. Seen men die, seen cities burn, seen things that'll haunt me forever, but I never had an enemy say thank you before, never had one of them give me something just because they were grateful." Chen examined the handkerchief. "Maybe that's because we finally gave them something worth being grateful for, not just food or shelter or medical care, something deeper. We gave them back their dignity." The week after the doors were completed, Fletcher's report reached regional headquarters. It landed on the desk of General Howard Marks, a career officer who had overseen POW operations since 1942. His initial reaction was skeptical. "They did what without explicit approval?" he asked his aide. "Built bathroom modifications based on prisoner requests? That's irregular." But the aide had brought the full file, including Patterson's medical documentation. Marks read through it carefully. Pre-installation statistics. 15 reported cases of bladder infections in 1 month. Dehydration symptoms in 8 prisoners, 2 cases of fainting. Post-installation statistics. 2 infection cases, both resolving, no new stress symptoms, overall health improvement across all metrics. Cost, $47 in materials, 3 days of labor using personnel already assigned to camp maintenance. Marks looked at the numbers. He was a practical man, a logistics expert who understood efficiency. From a pure resource standpoint, he said to his aide, this is a good investment. Small cost, significant return. Health improvements mean fewer medical resources needed long-term. Improved cooperation means fewer disciplinary issues, and it appears to comply with Geneva Convention requirements for humane treatment. His aide nodded. There's also a precedent concern, sir. Other camps might request similar modifications. Is that a problem? Well, sir, if we approve this, we're essentially establishing a new standard. Marx considered. The war was turning. Everyone knew it. Germany was collapsing. Within months, maybe a year, this would be over. And when it ended, America would have to answer for how it treated prisoners. Better to be remembered as the nation that provided privacy doors than as the one that denied basic dignity. Draft a policy recommendation, he ordered. All camps holding female POWs should provide private sanitation facilities. Make it about health standards and operational efficiency. We don't need to make it philosophical. By January 1945, an official memorandum went out to all POW camp commanders. It was bureaucratic, technical, deliberately unemotional. Sanitation facilities for female prisoners. All facilities housing female POWs shall provide individual privacy stalls. Modifications should include appropriate partitions or doors while maintaining security requirements. Implementation timeline, 90 days. Justification, medical necessity, and operational efficiency. No speeches, no press releases, just a policy change that would affect thousands of women held in American POW camps across the country. And it started because 23 women asked, because one officer listened, because one engineer cared enough to draw plans before approval came, because a few soldiers remembered that the enemy was human. In February, Margarete received a letter from home. Her mother's handwriting was shakier than before, the paper thin and precious. My dear daughter, it read in German, your brother is alive. He was captured by Americans near the Siegfried Line. His letter said they feed him adequately and treat him fairly. He mentioned something strange. They ask if prisoners need anything. They listen to requests. He said one man asked for writing paper to send letters home, and they provided it without hesitation. I don't understand this war anymore. Who treats enemies with such consideration? The letter continued. He also said the American guards built a small library where prisoners can read. Books in German, in English, even some in French. He, who never read anything but newspapers before the war, now spends his evenings reading poetry. He said it helps him remember he's still human. Perhaps there are different ways to fight. Perhaps there are different ways to win. Margarete read the letter 3 times, then sat in silence. Her brother, somewhere in America, was experiencing the same paradox, the same unexpected mercy, the same slow realization that everything they'd been told about the enemy was incomplete, oversimplified, propaganda mixing with truth in ways that made clarity impossible. She wrote back carefully, Mama, tell my brother I understand what he's feeling. The Americans gave us bathroom doors here. Such a small thing, such a large meaning. They could have kept us in shame. They chose not to. I think we are learning what it means to be defeated by people who remember we are human. It's the strangest defeat, because part of me feels grateful, and I don't know if that makes me weak or if it makes me wise. One evening in March, Fletcher and Chen sat in Fletcher's office after a long day. The war news was constant now, Germany collapsing from both sides, the end visible on the horizon. Fletcher poured 2 small glasses of whiskey, against regulations, but necessary sometimes. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the camp settling down for night. You know what bothers me about this whole door situation? Fletcher said finally. Sir, it shouldn't have taken a formal request. We should have thought of it from the start. Should have designed the facilities properly from day one. Chen sipped his whiskey. With respect, sir, how could you have thought of it? You're a man. You've never needed bathroom privacy to be explicitly provided. It's just there for you, automatic, assumed. The women had to ask because we never imagined what they needed. Fletcher nodded slowly. So what's the lesson? Maybe that we need to imagine harder. Think about what we'd want if positions were reversed. My mother in Manzanar, your son if he's captured, these women here. We're all just people trying to maintain dignity in impossible situations. You think this matters? Fletcher asked. After the war, I mean. Will anyone remember bathroom doors? Chen set down his glass and spoke carefully, thoughtfully. Sir, I think about my mother a lot. In that camp, no one built her bathroom doors. No one asked what she needed. They just held her, counted her, fed her minimally, and waited for the war to end. It was legal, by the rules, following orders. But it wasn't decent. And she never forgot it, never forgave it. He paused, gathering his thoughts. These women will go home someday. They'll tell their children, their grandchildren, about being captured by Americans. What will they say? That we locked them up? Yes. That we defeated their country? Yes. But also that we asked what they needed, that we listened when they spoke, that we built them doors when we didn't have to. That difference, That's what they'll remember. That's what shapes what comes after. Fletcher was quiet for a long time. Then he said softly, "We're going to win this war with bombs and bullets and superior logistics, but maybe we win the peace with bathroom doors, with small acts of decency that prove we're better than our worst impulses." In May 1945, the war ended. The announcement came through camp loudspeakers, crackling and official. Some women cheered, others wept, many sat in stunned silence, unable to process that the thing that had defined their lives for years was suddenly over. Margarete felt a strange emptiness, relief, yes, but also fear. What was left of home? Who was still alive? What world would she return to? The repatriation process took months. Paperwork, verification, medical clearances, transportation logistics. During that time, Margarete continued working in the camp, helping in the infirmary, translating for newer prisoners who arrived in the final chaotic days of collapse. She became a bridge between the American staff and the German women, trusted by both sides. One afternoon in June, Chen found her standing outside the latrine building, looking at it with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Strange thing to remember," he said through Clara Ara, who still translated occasionally. Margarete smiled. "Not strange, important. What will you tell people? About here?" She thought carefully. "The truth. That you defeated us in battle, but you didn't try to break us after. That you remembered we were human, even when you didn't have to. That you built us doors, when you could have left us exposed." She paused. "Will they believe me?" "I don't know," Chen admitted. "But you have this." He handed her something, a small piece of wood, a scrap left over from the door construction. He had sanded it smooth, written on it in careful letters, "Fort Oglethorpe, December 1944. Built with dignity." Margarete took it, held it in her palm like something precious. "Thank you. For everything. For listening. For caring. For building." Chen nodded once, uncomfortable with gratitude, but accepting it. "Go home," he said gently. "Rebuild. And maybe, if you can, tell people that enemies can choose to stay human. That choice matters. That it's what separates civilization from chaos." By August, Margarete was on a ship heading back to Europe. The ocean was the same gray expanse she'd crossed as a frightened prisoner the year before, but everything else was different. She stood on deck with other women, watching America recede in the distance, and felt a complicated mixture of emotions. Relief to be going home, grief for what waited there, gratitude for what she'd experienced here, and a strange, profound hope that the lessons learned in a Georgia POW camp might somehow matter in the shattered world they were returning to. When she finally reached what remained of Munich, the devastation was worse than she'd imagined. Her childhood street was rubble. Her mother's house was a pile of broken bricks. But her mother was alive, living in a shelter, thin and aged, but alive. They held each other and cried. Later, over thin soup that tasted like poverty, Margarete tried to explain what had happened to her. "They built us bathroom doors, Mama, the Americans, when they didn't have to, when we had no right to ask, when we were their enemies. They listened, and they built us doors." Her mother was silent for a long time. Then she said, "Maybe that's why they won. Not because they had more bombs, but because they remembered how to be human even when it was difficult." In the years that followed, Margarete became part of the rebuilding. She worked as a translator for Allied administrators, helping bridge the gap between occupiers and occupied. She spoke at community meetings, at schools, telling her story carefully, honestly. Some people didn't want to hear it. Some called her a collaborator, accused her of sympathizing with the enemy. But others listened. Others understood. She kept Chen's piece of wood her whole life, kept her notebook with all its observations, and when she was very old, she donated both to a museum at Fort Oglethorpe, which had been preserved as a historical site. The exhibit was modest. Photographs of the camp, documents from the period, artifacts from daily life, and in one small case, a piece of wood with writing on it, and a worn notebook with entries in German. The placard read, "Margarete Hoffman, German POW, 1944-1945. Her request for bathroom privacy led to policy changes affecting all women prisoners in U.S. custody. Her testimony, they won the war with armies, but they won me with a door." Visitors sometimes stood before that exhibit for a long time, trying to understand why bathroom doors mattered enough to remember. And if they read the full story, they learned something profound. That civilization is built in small acts, that dignity matters even in defeat, that the measure of a society is how it treats those who have no power to demand better treatment. Margarete lived to be 89 years old. She told her story until she couldn't anymore, until memory faded and words became difficult. But the last thing she said about it to her granddaughter who visited her in the nursing home was this: "They didn't have to give us anything. We were defeated. We were enemies. We had no leverage, no power, no right to ask. But we asked anyway, and they said yes. That yes changed everything. It taught me that even in the darkest times, even between enemies, human decency is possible. It's not guaranteed. It requires choice, courage, and care. But it's possible. And that possibility is what saved me. Not from captivity, but from despair. The doors are long gone now, rotted and replaced decades ago, but the lesson remains, preserved in documents and memories and small pieces of wood kept in museum cases, that in 1944, in a POW camp in Georgia, 23 women asked for privacy, and America said yes. And that simple yes, that small act of listening and responding with care, became a testament to the idea that we choose who we are not in how we treat our friends, but in how we treat our enemies when no one is watching. We are always watching ourselves, and the doors we build, or fail to build, reveal everything.